Hello everyone, welcome to Chess.com's video lecture series. This is International Master Mark Ginsburg, and today we're starting a new topic about when to use and when not to use computer chess engines. The first session today, we're going to discuss a specific case where they're useful, and that's when you notice that a refuted opening was played, and you know it's refuted because you've either read about it or seen it played with disastrous effects previously, but when you saw it, it didn't quite go according to plan, and maybe the player playing the refuted opening got away with it. So you can check the opening with a computer engine, and then you can record your findings, for example, in one of those old-style Soviet notebooks, so you can remember in case anyone in the future tries it against you. The first case in point today was from the Copper State International. I noticed David Proust was playing a player called Ravichandran, and Proust was white, and the game started out, to my surprise, with e4, c5, knight f3, e6, d4, takes, knight f6, knight c3, and now, much to my surprise, Proust's opponent played queen b6. I had seen this move roundly criticized in some chess articles, particularly revolving around a game that was played not too long ago, Hess against Lapshun. Proust played the right first move, e5, that seems indicated. That's what Hess did against Lapshun. And then his opponent played the only possible move to stay in the game, bishop to c5. Now at this point, the previous article recommended knight d to b5. That's indeed what Hess played. But if you don't know the particulars of the position, if this is new to you for the first time, it's scary. First of all, knight d b5, you have to wonder about black taking the f-pawn. And you also have to wonder about other moves for black and what the consequences are. Well, this helps to run the computer because, first of all, if black were to take on f2, that would lose, but we have to learn why. First of all, white should not play his king to d2 because that just leads to checkmate. That would be embarrassing. He should play his king up to e2, and white's going to win this position, but it's helpful to know why. There are only two knight moves to consider, knight to d5 and knight to g4. They both lose for different reasons. Knight to d5, remember, as a human, remember some of the motifs that the computer always points out to you. One of the things the computer points out to you is when the bishop has left c5, the knight should jump into d6 without delay. So you go ahead and play the check. Black plays his king up, and now you can take this knight with check. And even to humans at this point, it's obvious that white is winning with the attack on f7. For example, if black defends it, it's forced mate, and this would be nice to get in a game, wouldn't it? He has to block, you take, he takes, and now you have queen e5 check, a nice move exploiting the pin, and it's forced mate after the following moves. King back, bishop takes, king up, knight double check. It's getting pretty grim, isn't it? King up, queen check, king here. And now the coup de grace, you deliver a discovered check with the bishop. Black's king has to run somewhere to a5 or to a6. And white's going to be delivering checkmate in any case. So that is an embarrassing outcome for black. Now, of course, a good player wouldn't play into that crushing line, but you do have to know the basics to refute black. So let's see. Black has just taken on f2, and we just analyzed knight to d5, which loses to knight d6 check. The other move, possible move, is knight to g4, which offers a few more chances, but the computer quickly refutes it with h3. And now, for example, he has two moves. Let's see what they are. The first move would be to play knight takes e5. Do you see white's win? Notice that the queen and the bishop are stuck to each other. So all we have to do is play our queen up to d6, threatening not only the knight, but also knight to c7 check, picking up the rook. And if black were to trade the queens, then after white took back, the bishop would be hanging. So this move, queen d6, just wins a piece in the game. Very nice. So h3, he cannot take the pawn because of queen d6. Notice in this position we delayed the knight check, which was a nuance. Black could play bishop to g3, threatening to pop in with the queen. But if you've looked at this with the computer, you are confident that you can first give a check. Let's say he brings his king to safety, and now we can safely take the knight. Let's say he comes in and then attacks white's king. Looks scary, right? White's king is in a minefield, but it's an illusion because after knight ce4, we're hitting the queen and the bishop. If he were to take the pawn with check, we just scramble to safety, and we win immediately with the fork on the queen and bishop. And if he were to play queen d4 check, we just dart back with king e2. The knights support each other very nicely, and white wins here too, quite easily. Let's see a few more moves on that one. Suppose he were to take the pawn. Well, anything wins here. For example, we could play c3 with the idea of queen d3 and winning the stray bishop. If he were to play f5, we can take, and then if he takes back, it looks like white might be in some trouble because of the pin, but it's not true because our c3 move opened up the queen b3 line, threatening mate, and that's a very unpleasant scenario. For example, if he came back with the knight defending, we get black in a cross pin with the nice move rook h5. Isn't that nice? We're using all our pieces. If he protects f5 with g6, we just play a check, and it's quite obvious that black is in a lot of trouble. King up, bishop check, king f8, and now we renew the mate threat, and black's going to lose. Hopefully these two variations gave you an idea of why bishop takes f2 is going to lose. You'll probably agree that over the board, especially at today's faster time controls, it's too much for white. Now, interestingly, Proust didn't reject this knight db5 move because of f2, which is obviously bad. He rejected it because black had another defense, which was knight to d5. And after this, the situation seemed to be a bit unclear. The question is, what can we do about it? Also, another question here, what do we do about a6? That seems to lead to a position where white maybe could get the knight and black can get white's knight, and then f2 might be an issue. Let's take a look at this a6 move. It turns out after a6, the best move is the surprising queen f3, giving f2 some more support. Now, if black played the knight out, we can take. And the computer is going to tell us how to navigate this position to an advantage. For example, after we take it, he has to take back. We can play our knight back. and it looks structurally nice. Black must pin the knight, and now we can safely take castles, play our bishop to an active position. Let's say black plays his knight out. We get our king to safety, very important. d6 takes, bishop here, queen e4. And after black takes the bishop, interestingly, white has an in-between move here the computer finds, which is bishop e3, very strong, because black can't consider bishop to c5 because of the knight fork. So he has to play the queen somewhere, and white's gained a tempo for development. That's a nice little trick. For example, if we brought the queen out to safety, we could just take back. Bishop takes, rook to the middle, and we're up a pawn for nothing. Let's go back. So that knight d5 move didn't work out very well. Do we have anything else? Well, black could try to take the knight on b5. But if he takes the knight on b5, of course, we just take the knight on f6. And ruining black's kingside pawns is more important than black's possible pressure on f2. Black is less developed than white. For example, suppose black took the pawn back. Well, we can bring the knight to an active square, hitting f6 again, and this computer-aided move is strengthened by the realization that f5 loses to the double attack on c5 and h8. Very nice. So if f5 is not playable, it's obviously very bad. For example, f5, we saw that one. Can't do that. What else? He could play the knight out, just ignoring, but then we can take the pawn off easily. Let's say he brought the king to safety. It's not looking good, of course. What's the easiest? The easiest is just to shut out black from the d4 square and play c3. This is an easy advantage. If black were to try to develop his pieces, at this point we can crush him with knight d5, and this motif is because pawn takes is met by queen check, picking up the rook. So we can make some conclusions about the opening. The conclusions are that white has to tread a narrow path. On the other hand, black is very limited too in his moves. And so after knight db5, we can start to talk about a big plus for white, a pawn advantage at the minimum in computer terms. In the Hess-Lapshin game, which apparently neither player was familiar with, Lapshin played the retreat knight g8, and it's quite easy to see that that move is crushed by knight e4, and everything is converging on d6, and white wins. So there haven't been many prior examples of this, and when I asked the player playing black's pieces after the game, he said he was going to rely on the move a6, but I think his sources underestimated, his theoretical sources underestimated queen f3. So that takes care of that variation, and I'm going to go over with you one more variation that I recently encountered in Blitz. And it was a variation that I knew loses, but I didn't know exactly why, and as a consequence, I went wrong. Let me bring it up to you. When white plays e4, black sometimes, especially in Blitz, plays a gambit line in the center counter, also known as the Scandinavian. Black sometimes plays this bishop g4 move, which is a pawn gambit. And black hopes to prove that his lead in development compensates for the lost pawn. When I played in Switzerland in the year 2000, There are some Hungarian grandmasters who are very theoretical, like Grosspeter, and they told me it was completely unsound. They said just keep taking pawns as they are offered and bring the pieces out like knight c3, bishop e3, queen d2, knight ge2, and bother the bishop later with g4, and then bring the knight out and get the bishop off that diagonal, and white should be clearly better with a pawn advantage. Now, it's easier said than done, because in a blitz game recently, I faced, first of all, an unfamiliar move. I faced bishop takes, and after knight c3, queen e7, he's already threatening discoveries on my king. I played the right move, king f2, and he played knight c6. Obviously, he's not fearing d5 because he can castle long quickly and try to get to my king. But a computer will show me that I can play d5, because after castles long, which I was afraid of in the blitz game, white has the simple queen a4, which not only unpins, but it threatens the a7 pawn, which is lethal in certain positions if the knight leaves. So after queen a4, white is just dead winning. For example, bishop takes, pawn takes, knight takes. And the computer helps win this position. We take on d5, simplifying. We start to bring our pieces to safety. Black, of course, has to do something quickly. He plays knight b4, trying to get into d3. Now the question is, how do I defend this? I bring my knight to a safe square, hitting his rook. And now we're going to come to a fantastic conception. Black has to give a check. I put my bishop in the way. He puts his rook to d2 check, and it looks scary, right? I put my bishop in the way. Fortunately, my knight, for the time being, is holding d3. He continues his sacrificial play, because in this position, I have to be careful. If I were to take with the knight, suddenly he plays his knight into d3, and my bishop is lost. Worse, it guards against my queen e8 check threat. So white's much worse here, in fact, losing. But the computer helps find a better move. King takes, queen check, and this was black's idea. The concept is if white moves his king to a square, for example, f2, black can give his knight check, and then white's queen is lost, and white loses again. That's one of black's main tricks. But the computer helps find that in this position, I can put my knight in the way immediately, and that key resource it actually turns the tables, because after queen takes, there's no win of white's queen, and I am threatening that check down there. So he has to bring his bishop out to guard against my queen check, and now I can consolidate with the extra material. I just play my rook to d1. Suppose he gave a check last try. Just take the queen, knight takes, rook attack knight, knight takes, and now the computer understands that we can take the bishop instead of the knight, and that's white's easiest way to win. He should convert this easily. It's much better to play against a knight than a bishop in this kind of ending. Now, I hope these two examples showed you the power of computer play in the opening when black plays an inferior opening. Let's see how this one went again. It went like this. This variation is to be recommended because it's not well regarded theoretically, so it stands to reason that the computer should show defensive resources. I encourage you from this point to analyze black's other main try. Recall we just saw bishop takes pawn, but you should analyze knight c6 as well. the correct move is bishop to e3 and force black to deal with the e-pawn losing time. After this, get a hold of a computer engine and prove white's advantage as an exercise to you. We'll go over this next time, and that will complete our discussion of this unsound pawn gambit, which was initiated by the dubious move bishop to g4. So that concludes our first segment on when to use and when not to use computer engines. In this segment, we learned you should use them to refute dubious openings that you noticed played either near you, in my case on a board adjacent to me at the Copper State International in Mesa, or in blitz games or other games you happen to play in your own practice. If you go over them thoroughly, you can record the reason why they should be dead and buried quite conclusively. So the next time you find them played against you, if you recall your findings, you should be able to use your homework to good use and improve your tournament results. So this is International Master Mark Ginsburg signing off for now, and I'll speak to you next time that we continue this topic.